Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network for our final segment of the day. We've talked NFL offseason, we've talked the new college football format. Now we're going to be switching to the NBA here, and not necessarily the play on the court, but the conversations that surrounded the league. In an off day, we are still in the All-Star break. Officially, the games start back up again tomorrow, so we'll be able to talk more so about the bigger picture things, the second half of the season, and all of that. We already have some segments planned for that, but it's interesting because, especially given that we are on this break, JJ Redick made his return to ESPN. He had been off of First Take for a while. He spent a lot of time doing the show with them earlier in the year, and he comes back yesterday and things got a little bit heated where he went on this rant talking about Doc Rivers after Doc Rivers this past weekend at All-Star Weekend talked about how hard his position is and, specifically coming in during the middle of the year and taking over for somebody else's job. He also had some quotes that came out. There was some sort of Sirius XM radio interview that he did where he specifically talked about that he didn't understand why the Bucks decided to fire Adrian Griffin. He told them directly that he didn't understand the decision, and in return they said, quote, "It doesn't matter, we've done it, we want you." So, very interesting dialogue that has come out surrounding the Bucks, surrounding Doc Rivers since then. But JJ Redick on ESPN yesterday went on this rant about Doc's excuse making. He said, "I've seen the trend for years. The trend is always making excuses." He later said, "Taking over a team in the middle of the season is hard, just like getting traded in the middle of the season is hard for a player. We get it, but it's always an excuse. It's always throwing your team under the bus." JJ here is speaking as a former player and one that used to play for Doc Rivers himself. So maybe, I don't know what their relationship was like during those Clippers years, but potentially something to take into consideration. Myself, as someone who has obviously never been an NBA player or never been an NBA coach, I did think that the insinuation that getting traded in the middle of a season as a player is just as hard as, taking over as a coach in the middle of the year, I think that they are definitely not equivalent things, especially in Doc's position where it's similar, I guess, to his analogy of getting traded as a player. It's having no real understanding of what it's like in the locker room there. It's not like an interim coach stepping up. He came from outside of the building into the building to take over a team that was hoping to win a championship, and he was asked to do so. Coaching requires you to get an entire group of grown men to believe in you, to buy into your scheme, and, in some cases, have these grown men swallow their pride in terms of the roles that they sought for themselves, all in the name of creating a better team product as a whole. And a lot of the time that doesn't necessarily align with what your individual goals are as a player. And, strategically, there are differences from place to place, from different franchises and different teams. The expectations put onto Doc Rivers this season was to take a team that was already, championship contender, was having a lot of success in the regular season from a win-loss perspective, and change the identity of the team to sort of go a level deeper than just the wins and losses, and to resurrect the defense, create a more stable relationship between the coaching staff and the players, and to get the whole group sort of playing more of a championship brand of basketball. Now, JJ Redick did move from team to team during the season a couple times during the course of his career. And the difference is, and I know that there were definitely different schematic things like that, but JJ Redick, when he made these moves during the regular season for himself, he was asked to shoot, to play basketball, to do what he's best at. Doc Rivers here, he's more so evaluating the situation here and playing chess. JJ Redick is sort of just a playing piece that he just has to worry about himself, really. And yes, it's all in the name of playing a better brand of basketball as a whole, as a team. But personally for him, he just had to concern himself with himself. He was just having to apply his talent to the court as opposed to Doc Rivers looking at the room as a whole and figuring out how those different talents on his roster match up to one another. Now, Doc Rivers, I think that going back to last year, definitely did sort of go with the excuse-making route. And I don't think that it was totally unfair. I think that, dealing with that situation in Philadelphia, and specifically with James Harden, who sort of quit on him and the Sixers following the All-Star break, it was definitely a very difficult situation to manage, and I can understand his frustrations with all of that. But, maybe JJ has a point here that, and I don't know, maybe I have to go back and reread some of these quotes. I don't know if it was necessarily throwing guys under the bus. Now, I remember him having a quote a couple weeks ago about some of the defensive effort and guys getting back. Now, that's something that also can be a little bit of a schematic theme. It didn't seem like Adrian Griffin really understood the balance of trying to go for offensive rebounding versus getting back on defense. There was a lot of miscommunication there. So the transition defense has been a very big issue, and he openly talked about that. Again, I'll have to go back and read through some of the quotes as far as throwing guys under the bus. I didn't fully get that sort of an idea. He was pretty open about sort of throwing James Harden more so under the bus, but I'm curious if that was something that has come up more directly in Milwaukee since he's taken over there. But because of this rant from JJ Redick, a couple other people in the NBA community spoke up, starting with Patrick Beverley, who was just traded to the Bucks during the All-Star break, sticking up for his guy, his coach, and, he's trying to sort of assimilate himself into Milwaukee, and part of that was defending the guy at the top, the guy that's not selfishly, but the guy that's calling all the shots, including your individual playtime. So, and Pat Bev has never been short of words, and especially with social media presence since taking over his podcast, which is a pretty good watch. Definitely do recommend it. But Pat Bev tweeted back at JJ after this, saying that Doc Rivers was the savior of his career, and JJ wouldn't have been where he was if it weren't for Doc Rivers, which I definitely disagree with. JJ Redick took definitely a certain attitude with that statement, telling him to get the F out of here, and that he had another contract lined up on another team at the time. This is coming off of a little bit of an era of the NBA that, I was a little too young to fully understand all the dynamics of it. But JJ Redick was a 20-minute per game guy on a finals team with the Magic prior to his time in LA with Doc Rivers. So I definitely wouldn't say that, especially JJ Redick, very accomplished at the college level as well. So I definitely disagree with the point that Pat Bev was trying to make. And then Doc's son, Austin Rivers, also a former NBA player, and also like JJ, is employed by a media company. I think he's with ESPN as well. And he just said that he found the comments to be strange. He said that Redick played the best basketball of his career under Doc, and he didn't really understand where it was coming from. That is also a pretty debatable statement in terms of the best basketball of his career being under Doc Rivers. I'm curious what JJ's take on when the best basketball of his career was, because like I mentioned, he was pretty impactful as that sort of six-man role coming off the bench for a team that made the finals with the Magic. Keep in mind, Doc and the Clippers never made the finals. I'm not sure if they even made the conference finals to even that extent as well. So, impact guy off the bench. And JJ has always been, a role player guy, a very impactful role player guy, but it's not like he's been a number one star necessarily. But I do think that when he was sort of elevated to a higher role in terms of the pecking order of scoring options, it was when he was in Philadelphia playing off of Joel Embiid. That's when he averaged his career high in points per game. So you have a role player in JJ Redick, but one of the best role players at the time that he was in the league, and he did different things for these different teams over the course of his career. So not that Austin Rivers was saying these comments necessarily in all too, malicious of a way. I think that this was Austin who was going to get asked about the thoughts of it because he works in media, because it is his father that was sort of on the other end of this pretty big story of a rant, especially once Pat Bev got himself involved. But, all in all, I think it's very interesting, and the perception of Doc Rivers for a lot of it has been because of the fact that they've blown the 3-1 leads his teams have. It's been 3 different 3-1 leads in different locations as well. So the stubbornness, the not being able to make adjustments is something that has followed him around a little bit. And again, I think that last year in Philly, there was definitely a throwing his team under the bus, but we are still in the pretty early stages in terms of Doc Rivers in Milwaukee and the roster that he's still getting familiar with himself and all of that. So there's still time for him and this team to turn things around. I know that there's been a lot of weird quotes that have come from the Bucks from this past weekend as a whole that we don't really need to touch on all that much right now, but there was Giannis saying that he doesn't even watch basketball. He doesn't know what his opponents are going to do. It makes the game harder for him. Dame Lillard gave his dream starting 5, and it did not include Giannis, but it included Bam Adebayo, who obviously plays for the Miami Heat, and Dame kept putting out these subtle hints that he was trying to go to Miami this offseason. So, a lot of weird stuff going on with the Bucks right now, and it does sort of make you not feel great about them as far as a contender. With star power alone, I think that it's hard to write them off, but they're also definitely not making it easy. I know that Doc didn't even necessarily say anything himself other than people sort of making fun of him for the quotes about not understanding why they were hiring him instead of Griffin, which that phrasing alone even is a little bit, cherry picked, the way that you can put it that way. But there's just a lot going on with the Bucks right now, and there's tons of talent there. Are they going to figure it out? That's something that we can talk some more so on as the NBA season is getting into full effect after the All-Star break, after the NFL season has ended. So we will absolutely be continuing to talk about their situation as a whole. As for now, that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much to the GSMC Sports Podcast, the GSMC Sports Network, for allowing us to host these shows. Just a reminder, we will be back every day at 2 p.m. So we will catch you guys tomorrow, and thanks for tuning in. Let's go.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.